Welcome. On behalf of the Holder Initiative, I'd like to welcome you tonight to tonight's Fireside Chat. My name is Beth Manchester. I'm the Associate Director of the Holder Initiative, and we're so thrilled to invite you here to listen to our wonderful artist in residence, Chris Wolfe, in conversation with our dear friend, Ian Manuel. Chris Wolfe, as I said, is our artist in residence. He is a proud graduate of the School of the Arts, where he earned his MFA in creative writing as a fiction concentrator. In his role at the Holder Initiative and in partnership with Columbia's Justice and Education Initiative, Chris teaches a creative writing seminar called Incarcerated Yet Inspired to undergraduate students here on campus, as well as to students at Rikers Island. His writing has been featured in Bomb Magazine, Guernica, the New York Times Magazine, and 2 anthologies, including The Road Ahead, Fiction from the Forever War, and The Kiss, Intimacies from Writers. In addition to serving as the artist in residence at the Holder Initiative, Chris has been appointed as an adjunct assistant professor in Columbia University's School of the Arts and the Writing Program. And as I said earlier, we are thrilled to welcome back our dear friend, Ian Manuel. Ian is a poet, motivational speaker, and staunch advocate for criminal justice reform. He's the author of My Time Will Come, a memoir of crime, punishment, hope, and redemption, which we will get to hear more about this evening, I hope. Ian performs spoken word and poetry and was a 2017 McDowell Fellow for Nonfiction Literature. He appeared on Starbucks Upstanders, a video series that shares stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things to create positive change. And he lives here in New York City. So with that, I would like to hand things over to Chris Wolfe. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you so much, Beth. It's a pleasure to be here with you all this evening. As Beth mentioned, we are joined this evening by Mr. Ian Manuel. Ian is the author of My Time Will Come, an extraordinary book that documents his life experience, which includes, unfortunately, an 18 consecutive year period of incarceration in solitary confinement in the state of Florida. Ian's story was one that was featured in Brian Stevenson's Just Mercy. And fortunately, Ian wrote My Time Will Come and essentially told his own story in his own voice. And it has been one that's been unique and has inspired so many people, including my students, some of which who are students out at Rikers Island Jail, who have expressed their gratitude. So Ian, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Ian, I want to start by saying, I know we spoke earlier this week, and you shared with me during that conversation that you were about to celebrate your 45th birthday. And so I want to tell you again, happy birthday. It's so great to see you and know that you are celebrating that birthday as a free man with us. So I have to ask, how did you spend that day?
Oh, great question, man. I spent that day, I spent my birthday with my girlfriend. She took me out to this nice Caribbean restaurant that had Jamaican vibes, man. It made me want to be in Jamaica instead of in New York City. But it was just this great restaurant out in Williamsburg, and I truly enjoyed myself and got some gifts and got, the day before my birthday, which was March 28th, I went to work. And my coworkers at the mayor's office threw me a birthday party at work, and that's something I'm not used to. I'm not used to being celebrated. I'm used to being humiliated and beaten and abused and all the things they do to you in the penal system behind the walls when the world isn't watching. So it feels good, man, to be celebrated by so many wonderful human beings.
Absolutely, man. I'm so glad to hear it. I'm so glad to hear it. And again, with the class, we just read My Time Will Come. And as I mentioned to you, I'm teaching this book on campus to undergraduate students at Columbia, and I'm teaching it to incarcerated students at Rikers Island. And as we read it, one of many pages that stood out to us was the very first page of this book. And what I'd like to do, if it's all right with you, is just read an excerpt from it and just ask you a follow-up question afterwards. Is that all right?
Yes, sir. Sure.
All right, great. So this is page 1. My story has been told many times. You can read it in police files and court records, case notes, and daily logs. The story of my birth, for example, told by a judge sentencing my mother to prison soon after my arrival in this world. And there's a story of that day when I was 5, and the case notes of a social worker who drove me to a foster home, and then a few days later drove me back to the projects, to the room I shared with my abuser. The story of my childhood was told multiple times by juvenile probation officers who found me to be a problem best managed inside the walls of institutions, in the illustrious space, cold and intensely bright in my memory, of an adult courtroom. It would be the robed and sober voice of a judge who would foretell my death when I was 13, relying on the stories of police officers, lawyers, and other accomplished professionals. He would send me to Florida State Prison, never to be released. As I said, my story has been told many times and by highly regarded experts in their field. But today, if you'll bear with me, I would like to tell it to you myself. I have reason to believe that experts may be wrong about me. You see, today, 30 years later, I am neither in prison nor dead. I mean, first, I just have to say, that's just a beautiful piece of writing, moving piece of writing. And, for me, knowing that your story was covered in Just Mercy, written by Brian Stevenson, how important was it for you to tell your own story, and why?
So many, it was very important for me to tell my story, man, because listening to it told throughout the years, it just like no one lived this, and it had been sugarcoated for so many years. And I wanted to tell my story, to give the hard facts, the tough truth, if you will. And I just wanted the world to know the hell I had been through and what I had survived. And I think I did a good job of that, man, to show that to show what a human being could do to another human being right here in America. I mean, I remember there was uproar about what was occurring in Abu Ghraib prisons in Iraq. And I'm like, they're outraged about this, but what's going on right here in America is just as bad. And no one is speaking on it, man. So I said, if I ever got out of prison, and I truly believe that I would tell my story and express the truth. And it would be a bitter pill for some Americans to swallow, but I just didn't care. I just wanted to share my truth with the world.
Yeah, I definitely understand what you're saying. I've shared with you before that I served in the military, and some of the things I witnessed, serving abroad in Iraq and coming back here in the States and being able to draw a parallel has been, just enlightening. It's been disturbing, and reading your book and hearing your experience definitely broadened my perspective. I as you talk about what you endured during that time when you were incarcerated, it makes me think about another passage that stood out to me. Is one in which you describe what it was like being in solitary confinement. In the book, you clarify that in the state of Florida, solitary confinement is called close management, for short, CM. And I just want to read this passage as well. It says, "A vicious cycle often ensues when prisoners who find it impossible to conform to behavioral expectations are condemned to solitary confinement. The restrictiveness reinforces and heightens their malady, resulting in the inevitable lengthening of their stay. For 18 years, I was such a prisoner. The longer I was in solitary, the harder it was for me to meet their behavioral expectations. And the harder it was for me to do as I was told, the more forceful the prison became in attempting to ensure that I did. Looking back, I know that it was a universal human experience during adolescence to seek to assert independence, to insist on defining one's own personhood. In the context of a solitary confinement cell, this stage of my life was received as defiance and met with brutal force aimed at crushing it. My journey through the arbitrary and cruel CM system was that of the rider of an elevator that is out of control, ascending and descending, seemingly with a mind of its own. Ian, I just want to tell you that I spoke with the students that I teach at Rikers, and I told them that I would be speaking with you tonight, and I asked them to send me their questions that I could pose to you, because I think part of what I seek to do is try to break down the barriers so that these conversations and exchanges of experiences and perspectives and ideas can take place. And so I gathered some of the questions, and one of them relates to this experience that you just wrote about. And one of our students, Bruno, asked just how you were able to maintain mentally in solitary confinement.
Yeah, so thank you for that question posed through Bruno. It was difficult, man. I think one of the things that helped me was me actually being so young. My brain was still forming. Had I already been an adult, I don't know if I would have been able to withstand the intensity of my incarceration. I think it was my imagination. Albert Einstein says, imagination is more important than knowledge. And in my childlike imagination, I was able to dive. The way I like to describe it is, I want you to imagine a fish underwater, right? Even a fish comes up for air every now and then and goes back down. Fish. And then, I was that fish. I would go underwater in the depths of my imagination, but I would come up for air, which was visualized with me. Air was like reality, right? That's what reality was. That was the oxygen. Those sometimes, though, in solitary confinement, reality was too much to bear. So people stayed underwater in their imagination, and it slipped into schizophrenia, right? And the people that developed schizophrenia, in my opinion, in solitary confinement, were those that just could not bear to come up for air because the harsh reality was just too much for their brain to bear. So one of the things I did, I created writing exercises for myself in that cell. I'd hear a song somewhere on a small transistor radio that someone had snuck to me, and I'd rewrite the song. I challenged myself. I say, Ian, if you can't rewrite Eminem's Lose Yourself, then you don't have what it takes to be successful. Or Ian, if you can't rewrite Langston Hughes' poem, Maya Angelou's poems, then you don't have what it takes. And I did not want to be defeated, so I would challenge myself, and someone sent me Tupac Shakur's poetry book, The Rose That Grew from Concrete.
Mm.
And I started rewriting Tupac's poems and sharing them with my fellow prisoners. And then they loved my work so much that they started to pay me to write their girlfriends and their wives poetry. And anytime you can get a prisoner to pay you to do anything, man, it's like it shows that you have value and a gift, because money is hard to come by when you're incarcerated. And prisoners are the toughest critics in the world. They're tougher than Simon Cowell. They're tougher than Sandman on Apollo. I'm telling you, like, if you're not good, they're gonna let you know it, and
let you know.
In no uncertain terms. So it was my imagination and me writing poetry which helped sustain me over the long course of those 18 years in solitary.
Ian, why do you think it was writing that that manifested? Why was it writing?
There's very little to do in a cell. You got 24 hours. It's not like they show you on TV, 23 hours in and 1 hour out. I mean, it was 24 hours locked down until we took them to court and they start letting us out to go to recreation a little more. What I mean by recreation, it's not like we're going out to play basketball. We're going to what is described as a dog cage with a dip bar and a pull-up bar in it, and you're handcuffed and walked to this cage and separated individually. But writing was it was an escape for me, man. I recall in second grade, they was passing out awards. I speak on this in my book. I was going to Catholic school at the time, St. Peter Claver, and my second grade teacher, Miss Yvonne Fort, she called all these names, and I'm waiting on my name to be called. I was getting kind of like embarrassed. Like, I brought my mama to the school and I wasn't hearing my name called. But last but not least, she called my name, Ian Manuel, for reading and for writing. And I'll never forget going up there, getting those 2 certificates, coming back, sitting down and trying to hand them to my mom. But before I could, my mother's friend, Miss Linda Wright, said, Ian, let me see those certificates. And she said, Ian, reading and writing, that's all you'll ever need in this world, and you could be whatever you want to be. And I held on to that. Words are powerfully impacted. Kids are impacted by words. And I held on to that. So in solitary confinement, I was stripped of everything except the ability to read and write. And so it enhanced me. I nurtured that gift and got to a point, man, where it's what carried me through 18 long years of solitary.
You know, Ian, I have to tell you that as I read the book, one thing that struck me was just how vulnerable you were on the page. And that's something that I strive to do, that I strive to teach, other writers to be willing to be vulnerable on the page. And I just want to, again, I know it's, I don't know how it sounds for you, for me to be reading your work, but as I read it, as I'm reading, I'm learning. And as I'm reading, I'm continuing to just be stirred by your word. So I just want to share this so the audience can hear a little bit of what I mean when I say vulnerability. And this is what I'm reading right now is just an excerpt from a section of the book where you just received the sentences that were handed down, right? And those sentences were, at the age of 14, life in prison without parole for count 1 robbery, for count 2 attempted robbery, a sentence of 15 years incarceration to run concurrently, and for count 3, attempted murder in the 1st degree, a sentence of life without parole, and for count 4, attempted murder, life probation on top of life without parole. So after receiving these sentences, you were led back to a holding cell, and I want to read this excerpt from that moment in the holding cell. Sam was the only inmate left in the holding cell, and I was glad he was there. I needed a familiar face, someone around whom I could be myself. He repeated, "You for real, Jim?" And he just started crying. He kept pounding his fist into his hand and saying, "I'm gonna kill all them crackers when I get out." His tears gave me permission to release my pent-up emotions. I cried as well. We hugged. I was surprised. I had never seen Sam cry except when his mom whipped him. Now both of us were sobbing in the holding cell before we were handcuffed together and returned by van to the county jail. Most days I still think about that moment with Sam, the way my sentence and the hopelessness of it hurt him too. What does it mean for one child to see another sent deliberately, methodically, and under the moral authority of the adults in charge into the heart of darkness? And I just want to ask what enabled you to go to these places of vulnerability as you wrote this story, as you wrote your life story?
Again, I think it goes back to me just wanting to tell the truth. And I knew that I've lived a life that was so outrageous that I don't have to add anything, or I don't have to take anything away. The truth in of itself is jarring, right? And
Right.
I didn't want to, when I got to a point doing these interviews like with Trevor Noah, Good Morning America, and or whatever, I didn't want to have to try to make up something that I couldn't remember. The truth is easy to tell. So when you was telling that story, I visually remember 30 years ago what happened after the resentencing. I mean, after the initial sentencing, going back to that holding cell, it's easy to convey. And I think it was also cathartic for me to revisit these places in a space where I'm now allowed to grieve. You know, in prison, you're not allowed to shed tears. Like, it's not a place to be vulnerable, because both the staff and the prisoners will hold it against you if they take those tears as weakness, you know? In society, you know, men are taught not to cry, to be this tough guy. But in telling my story, it was a place, it was another form of therapy for me, just like writing poetry was therapy for me. So when I say I used to write poetry and use my writing to survive, it was also therapeutic for me. I had to be my own therapist in that cell. And this was another way of providing therapy to myself, to express my pain on paper in a way that was truth, but also healing. I'm still healing, but writing this and exposing it to the world. And I wanted to show the world what they did to a child, man. What they did to a child was just inhumane and wrong on so many levels. And so, yeah, that's why I went there and exposed that vulnerability.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Ian. You know, I have to tell you, I might have told you this before. I first encountered your work when I was teaching my first semester at Rikers Island Jail. I was teaching a creative writing workshop where the students in the class were writing their own works and submitting it, and we were critiquing it and providing feedback on their work. And there was one student who wrote an essay. In the beginning of that essay was an epigraph, and that epigraph was "Uncried Tears," your poem, which was included in Just Mercy. And that student, I asked him where it came from, and he told me. He mentioned Just Mercy, and I told him, he asked me, "Have you read it?" And I said no, and he was like, well, you need to. And I did. And fortunately, I became aware of your story as well as the many others that are highlighted in Brian Stevenson's book. And I just have to say that your experience and what you have gone through, and your ability to have certain aspects of your experience conveyed through your poetry is, like I said at the beginning of this conversation, it's continuing to inspire so many people, including the people that I encounter inside Rikers Island, incarcerated inside Rikers Island. And I just want to ask, as with the poetry that's included, many of which are, included in My Time Will Come as well, beautifully incorporated into the work, into the story. Is there a piece that I guess you feel closest to?
Yeah, and it is, man. It's a poem that I wrote after my resentencing in 2011. It's a whole story surrounding my resentencing after the U.S. Supreme Court overturned all juvenile life sentences for non-homicide crimes in 2010, on May 17th, 2010, to be specific. I was immediately taken back to court to be resentenced, but once we got there, the state threw a monkey wrench in everybody's plans. Even the judge was surprised because the state attorney got up and said, we are appealing the decision. And the judge was like, this came from the U.S. Supreme Court. What do you mean you are appealing the decision? And the state attorney did, as state attorneys do, tried to throw a catch-22 in the mix. They said, the U.S. Supreme Court said Mr. Manuel's, the U.S. Supreme Court said that this was for non-homicide crime. Mr. Manuel is charged with attempted homicide, which falls under the homicide statute. So we don't believe that this ruling applies to Mr. Manuel. So the judge stayed the proceedings. I was sent back to prison. It was one of the most painful days of my life, like getting on that van, leaving Tampa, looking through the small holes of the van, and looking at my city get smaller and smaller and smaller, and it was disappearing. And in my mind, I was Adele, someone like you was very popular at the time, and I just felt so full of pain, just that song replaying in my mind. And I was like, don't forget me. I swear I'll be back. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And but I went back to prison and I wrote this poem called My Time Gonna Come. And it was based on me just feeling like, you know what? Despite what they just did to me, I'm gonna get out, man, one day, man. And so I wrote the poem, and it says, I promise you, the brunt of my oppression has a purpose, and the same person that you persecute will one day be worshipped. Though I stand before you bare-chested and shirtless, with my soul and emotions naked, just wanting to be nurtured. Yeah, despite the desperation, desertion, and hurting, my time gonna come. Though I composed this poem not knowing if I'll ever be able to perform it in an auditorium, I do it with the faith of a poet that believes he was born to do it. Like an acorn caught up in a storm, flung from the branch where it was born. You can only hold me back for so long. My time gonna come. Despite the difficulties and disappointments, my determination remains undaunted. Though the waters of my tomorrows are deep and uncharted, the buoyance of my character will float unwavering towards them, like a song written yet unrecorded. My time gonna come. Though you wrapped me in chains and sprayed me with chemical flames and did all of the things you did to add to my pain, my circumstances will change. I believe this with the depths of my being, that as long as this world continues to spin, it cannot end until it's been enjoyed by end. Remember this day, because things won't always be this way. My time gonna come. My time gonna come against all conceivable odds. My time gonna come. And so, yeah.
Ian, thank you so much, man. Thank you. That was beautiful. I'm so happy that your time did come.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Ian, I haven't mentioned it yet, but I just I want to now. So, one of your biggest advocates for your release was Mrs. Debbie Bakery.
Yes.
And Debbie Bakery is the woman that you shot when you were 13 years old. I have to imagine that for her to become one of your biggest advocates, there must have, I just have to imagine there must have been a certain degree of grace and some space created for you and Debbie to establish a meaningful connection despite that unfortunate incident. And I just want to ask, can you talk a little bit about what inspired you to reach out to her and establish that connection and what that healing process looked like and felt like?
Yeah, so I wasn't raised to hurt people. I had a loving grandmother. Even my mother didn't tell me to hurt people. And so I was sitting in prison, man, just feeling distraught about, what I had done. And I had never had an opportunity to apologize to this lady. And so in my childlike imagination, it was like, just give her a call, right? Give her a collect call from prison and see if she'll accept, and just tell this lady that you're sorry for what you did, man. She deserves that. Now, by me being a child, all the other consequences that could have happened and things that could have went wrong with that call, her calling the prison saying she's being harassed, calling the courts, anything like that, my childlike imagination didn't leave me there. Now, I was a little nervous because I was nervous more of being rejected than getting in trouble, right? So I called her, collect. I remember it like it was yesterday. And I picked up the phone, and back then you could just press 0 and get a live operator. And I picked up the phone, pressed 0, said collect call from Ian to Debbie. And the call went through. The operator asked her, you have a collect call from Ian for Debbie. Do you accept the charges? Then she said, can you ask him his last name? All type of thoughts went through my mind at that time, but I just said Manuel, Ian Manuel. And she said, yes, I accept. And I think this is a great segue for us to show the video, and then we can pick it up after the video is showed.
That sounds good.
I had built up a reputation in the neighborhood as someone who was fearless. It didn't matter that I was the youngest. I was given a gun.
My daughters were 3 and 1, and it was the first time I had been out, really, since I had my second baby. I see these 3 guys walk up to the car, and I wasn't really paying attention to them. One of them asked, "You got any change?" I heard from behind, "I'm serious, give it up."
And Debbie immediately screamed. I immediately fired.
He shot. I saw one of my teeth fall on the ground.
I threw the gun in some bushes and went back to the neighborhood.
My front tooth was gone. All the teeth on the bottom left side, all of them were gone. Then I found out who it was. They said, Ian Manuel, 13. I'm like, 13? There's no way a 13-year-old kid shot me. He's just a child.
My lawyer at the time, he goes and gets my mom, talks to my mom for about 15 minutes. My mom's older than me. My mom has been in prison before. She's dealt with the criminal justice system before. And she tells me, Ian, do what your lawyers say, baby. Do it for me. Please plead guilty for me. I said, okay, Mom. She went to her grave regretting that, man. Because I ended up being sentenced to life. I've been in prison about a year at this time. It was around December 1991. I had all my paperwork scattered out on the table. Police report was in there with Debbie's phone number. So I got the idea, let me call Debbie.
I got a phone call, and it was a collect call.
You have a collect call from Ian at Appalachian Correctional Institution. Will you accept the charges?
Morbid curiosity, more than anything. I said, I'll accept the charges.
The first thing I say was, Ms. Bagrey, I called to wish you and your family a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, and to apologize, for shooting you in the face.
He said he was sorry for what he did, and if it wouldn't be too much trouble, I would like to write you.
She said yes. And that's how our correspondence started.
I was getting letters from him from the time he was 14, and I'm reading them, and I'm thinking, the way his sentence structure, his vocabulary, he is way too young to be this articulate.
I'm glad I had followed my heart and picked up that phone that day, because if not, I would have missed out on a truly special friendship.
I forgave him because he was a child. I used this to make my life better. I refocused.
Ian had been sentenced to life without parole for a crime at the age of 13. I wrote him a letter. We're thinking about challenging the constitutionality of life without parole sentences for children. We started taking cases to the U.S. Supreme Court. When the court ruled that it is unconstitutional to impose these kinds of sentences on children convicted of non-homicides, we went back to the court where Ian's case was pending. We said, you have to give him relief. And Debbie came to court, and she said these amazing things about how she doesn't believe that the sentence that Ian received was fair or just, and she supports him being released from jail or prison.
Ian got up and made such a beautiful speech to the judge.
I told the judge, me and Debbie have been waiting for years for the judicial system to catch up to my remorse and her forgiveness. I was released that night.
Oh, God.
It's really hard to step out into the world, particularly now when you're coming out as an adult, but you left the world as a child. You look like an adult, but you have none of the life experiences that adults are supposed to have. Ian had never lived alone before. He's never rented anything. He's never had a bank account. He's never learned to drive. He doesn't know any of the things that people assume he knows.
You said, put your foot on the brake and then press this?
But having some outside people who are cheering for him, rooting for him, it's obviously made a huge impact.
Just press that, I guess.
And nobody has played that role more enthusiastically, more lovingly, and with more commitment than Debbie.
I see Ian for who he is. He still has a lot of growing to do. And I don't glorify him, but our relationship, it spans so many years from childhood to adulthood that he's almost like my child. You can just put it in like a pan and stir fry it.
You don't overcome fear and anger without courage. You don't affirm the other things people are when they make mistakes or when terrible things happen to them without courage.
I'm not saying he wasn't responsible for his actions, but when you're 13, you should be given the opportunity to change, to grow. What I feel is compassion for another human being.
Hell of a dance.
Ian, thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
You know, but I have to ask, are you and Debbie still in contact now?
Thank you for that question. Debbie just texted me 2 days ago to wish me a happy birthday. She's my Aries sister. Our birthdays are like a week apart. Yeah, we're still in contact, man. When you go through something like that, you're kind of part of each other's lives forever.
Mm.
So I'll be reaching out to her for her birthday on April 7th and wishing her a happy birthday as well.
You know, Ian, I know that you mentioned when we first started talking that you work for the mayor's office now, and that sort of relates to another question that I received from one of the students at Rikers Island. And, you know, they wanted to know, have you been able to get involved with other youth who have had contact with the system and impact on their lives? And you know, I just want to ask, what is your work with the mayor's office now?
Well, a couple things. So before joining the mayor's office, I was with Friends of the Island Academy, which is a youth justice network now out of Harlem. And I was more able to work like hand in hand with the youths that was coming out of the jails and stuff. And I was able to, you know, provide them some mentorship. And I travel the country speaking, sharing my story. And every time I go somewhere, it's set up for me to just speak to a few people, like just the college itself. But then I end up in a federal halfway house in Indiana that wasn't really part of the plan. And it's good for me to go back into the system and for people to see success stories, to show what you can become. Because in prison, they push you down and say that you're just a number. Like I remember so many times in prison, people telling me, Manuel, there's nothing special about you. If you have they try to strip you of your individuality, right? They want you to look like, talk like, and be like it's a slave mentality. It's a slave mentality, just like everybody else. They want you to behave and move like everybody else. But my job as the mayor's office, I sit on the young adult task force for Rikers Island. I got to meet with some of the kids in the housing, young adults in the housing units, and I let them hold my mayor's ID, my mayor's office ID, and my prison ID. I passed it around so they could actually see the difference. Like, it's one thing for someone to tell you this stuff, but for you to look and see, wow, this guy was in prison like us, and now he's actually working for the mayor's office, and he has a book out. And so I just try to inspire people through one thing about young adults or juveniles, is they gravitate towards authenticity. Like, they don't want to hear something, they really like want to hear from one of their own, you know? And so I think that's what I try to bring to the table, man, by showing them that you could come back from anything. If I could come back from a life sentence with 20 years of solitary confinement and losing my entire immediate family while I was in prison, hey man, you can come back from this, what you're going through now.
I mean, I think that that's such a powerful message, a powerful and necessary message. And it makes me think about, the folks who are on the outside who also have agency and power to create change and have an impact. And I just want to ask for those of us out here who are interested in looking at going inside, right, and creating a positive impact. Is there any advice or anything that you would want to share with us as we take up that work? Anything that we should know as we take up that work?
The only thing you got to bring to the table, man, is empathy. If you bring empathy to the table when you're dealing with an incarcerated individual, it will lead to a human connection and strengthening and compassion. Bring that empathy to the table. I try to have it, man, in my interactions with people that even aren't incarcerated, right? The homeless people I walk by, you wouldn't believe how many people just, turn the other head, turn their eyes like they don't see them. Empathy, man. I had a public defender ask me that question. It was a guy that was working for Brian at Equal Justice Initiative, and he asked me that question, like, Ian, I'm going into work for a public defender office, man. Any suggestions for me? I say, yeah, man, take empathy to the table, man. Bring that empathy with you. Don't try to, you're going to get overloaded with cases and you're going to have the knee-jerk reaction to want to just plead your clients out just so you can get them through the system. I say, imagine that this was you or someone in your family. That's what you need to do. So that's the only thing I would recommend for anyone that's interested in going on the inside or trying to challenge the system and help someone that's incarcerated, man. Just bring that, lead with empathy.
I really appreciate you saying that. That's a really important message. And, I also want to say that, my time going inside and working with folks has been, a period of time that has significantly changed my life. To me, this is, the most important work that I've ever done. And but one thing that I constantly think about, and it comes up in conversation and it comes up in class, is that a lot of the services that organizations are wanting to bring to folks who are incarcerated should consider that if those same resources and programs were provided to individuals before they came in contact with the system, then they might not have even come in contact with the system. So, I guess, a similar question is, for folks who are in positions to influence policy and influence the direction of resources for folks who are incarcerated and individuals who, are in situations that could potentially lead to them making contact with the system. Is there anything that you want to share with them?
Well, I'd say one of the biggest things that need more attention is the reentry process into society. Because the way it's designed, man, there's not a lot of help, man, out there, believe it or not, for people that are re-entering society, starting over from square one. Had I not been an EJI top client, had I not been in Just Mercy, had Brian Stevenson not been my lawyer, I don't know where I would be. I'd probably be homeless right now, because you got to realize my entire family died while I was incarcerated. And fortunately for me, God brought Brian Stevenson in my life And this is a guy that gets contacted from all over the world for people buying for his time, right? I didn't even know the guy existed, and he found me and not only got me out of prison, but it's been a pivotal part of my reentry. I've been out 5 years now, and him and EJI has been with me every step of the way. So I would tell people, if you don't want to become directly involved with the system, donate to organizations like the Equal Justice Initiative that are out there doing the work day in and day out to fight this corrupt system that we're up against, man. And the reentry process is one of the most pivotal parts of the criminal justice system, and we need more help.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ian. Well, look, man, I just want to say again, I thank you so much for making time tonight. I as I mentioned, I first encountered your work working at Rikers my first semester. Then I had a chance to meet you when you came out to the screening for Just Mercy at Columbia University. And subsequent to that, you showed up and allowed me to sit down and talk with you for another class that I was teaching out at Rikers during the pandemic. And I just want to say again, man, your presence, your words, your energy, enthusiasm have all inspired many people. And I know that some of them, fortunately, some of the students that I teach on campus are tuned in tonight. And I just want to thank you and just acknowledge what it is that you have done. And I know you said it before. I know Brian Stevenson has written it in his book, and you're a living testament to that. I think to a certain degree, if we search our history and shine light on those spaces that we often try to keep in the dark, we'll all see that we are not defined by the worst things that we have ever done. So man, I again just want to thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing a little bit about your life experience, your writing process. Your book is amazing. I'm so happy that it's out in the world. I remember speaking to you about it before it was published, and just knowing how excited you were about it coming to the world, and for it to be out here now is such a wonderful thing.
Paperback comes out next month, by the way. I just want to plug that. The paperback is being released in April.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I'll be looking forward.
Are there any questions in the queue?
I've actually been able to feed them into our conversation tonight.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
We have a little time. Do you mind if I ask the question?
Oh, please.
Great, thank you so much. So I just wanted to piggyback on Chris's question about, what you envision some positive interventions could be to help so that people don't end up in the criminal justice system. And, you noted the deep importance for, more resources when it comes to addressing barriers to reentry. And in reading your bio, which of course is deeply important, and it's something that we think a lot about at the Holder Initiative, and in different areas where we think about criminal justice reform at Columbia, and something that Chris can attest to. We have spent hours talking about preventative measures and what can be done on the front end. So in reading your bio and see that you started stealing cars when you were 11, what you can think of from your life that could have been a positive intervention, when you were 9 or 10, to help you get on a path where you weren't stealing cars when you were 11.
Yeah, so I would have to say you got to provide youth with something to fill those spaces during idle time. So I got in most of my trouble during the summer when school was out, right? Once school was out, in my younger years, like, you got to go to the YMCA, the Boys and Girls Club. provide something active that keeps kids busy. Besides that, I know you heard the terminology that idle hands do the devil's work. And that is so true. And the crime I went to prison for happened in the summer, July 27th, 1990. I would recommend, parents being there for their kids, providing mentors, positive mentorships, taking them out, man. If it's something, just something to keep those idle hands busy, and getting them involved in employment at a young age, providing them with responsibilities that keep their lives busy and keep them active, man. That's the only thing I could think of, Beth. It sure would have helped in my situation.
Well, for sure, I think summer is always a really difficult time, and any time where there can be out of school time programming, I think is really important. But summer is always hard in terms of what you're speaking about, and also in terms of not having access to school lunch and all sorts of issues that we run into the summer with school-age children. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And I would love to invite you and Chris to, maybe just say some parting words before we say good evening to everyone.
Thank you. Well, Chris, I appreciate you having me. And you were a great host for this Fireside Chat. I look forward to being able to do this in person or on Zoom again, man. Like, I live for this, man. We have to expose the system, because they do what they do. Like, they do what they do so blatantly behind those walls when no one's watching. Like I said during an interview, if what happened to George Floyd happened in broad daylight, imagine what's happening to our brothers and sisters behind the walls when no one is watching. So it's our jobs to expose this corrupt system, and coming on panels like this, it helps, man, because I'm going to tell the truth every time about what was done to me, from the torture for the 20 years in solitary confinement to losing my entire family, to being injected with psychotropic medications that I didn't need. So I just want to thank Columbia University for being a vessel to give me this stage and opportunity to try to change the system.
Well, Ian, I appreciate you saying that, man. I want to say that I consider part of my job, a lot of what I do, an opportunity to create space to what I look at as address the power dynamics that are created by the system itself, right? And essentially take whatever platform, whatever resources that I've been provided, because I know that I'm fortunate to even have them, and ensure that those who haven't had them do have them.
Yes, sir.
And and make it so that it's not something that's temporary, but hopefully something that continues to exist. And I've strived to do that during my time at Columbia, and fortunately Beth and the Holder Initiative have created these platforms for that work to take place. So man, I
thank you to the Holder Initiative. Big shout out.
Absolutely. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you both so much for this illuminating and inspiring talk this evening. Ian, thank you so much for your bravery. And as Chris said, your ability to be truthful in storytelling through your vulnerability. We're deeply appreciative. And Chris, we're deeply appreciative to you for all the work you do with students here on campus and at Rutgers, and encouraging them and inspiring them to be vulnerable on the page, and to tell their stories as well. We're deeply thankful to both of you. And we're so thankful to the audience for coming and joining us this evening. We're also making a nice recording of this, which we will share with all of you afterwards, so you can come and revisit this talk as many times as you like, and we hope it'll be often. Ian, I can't wait until we can invite you to come and do a talk on campus. We would love for you to be able to meet with our students in person. And before I let everyone go, just a quick plug. On April 28th, we will be hosting a panel with our American Voter Project series. and that will feature former Attorney General Eric Holder and will be moderated by former Solicitor General and Georgetown Law Professor Emil Gacciol. So please be on the lookout for information about that as well. And again, my deepest gratitude and on behalf of the Holder Initiative to Chris, to Ian, and to the audience for coming out to learn about these important issues and hopefully to feel inspired to get involved with the work. Thank you so much. Good night.